Scene is set in Mortimer Fitzgerald's new apartment. It's not a very spacious flat on the second story of a rather plain-looking apartment complex. He sits right now within his room, staring at a printer with its green light on as it hurriedly churns out page after page, once blank paper, coming out the other end filled with the fruits of his labors these past long nights. His first story since he had come to New Sarum. The first draft was being printed as he looked on. The hour is not too late, not close to midnight. He finds that in this moment right now, the moment when his work is about to become a reality, no longer words on a screen on a laptop, no longer words trapped inside his head, but something that someone could truly hold, take with them, and eventually even become a book. The excitement was palpable, and yet, in that excitement also lay the fear of knowing that once it was completed, there was so much more work to be done. For these past few nights, he had been plagued with nightmares. He had missed his chance to finally speak with the Toreador Primogen, and instead lay trapped in his own head, churning, screaming, unable to find solace or peace, and to awake the next night to find that he had missed his chance. Anger would be an understatement of Mortimer at that point. Even now, as the paper continues to churn out of the machine, he looks down at his cell phone, almost hoping that he will get the response text from Jacob. But it does not come this night. The Primogen has gone into his self-instituted exile once more, and who knows when he will be able to speak with him again. Jacob Crowley. An interesting man to say the least, thinks Mortimer. He has the grace of the Toreador without question, but he is so far distant removed. An artist loves adoration, to be seen, to be loved, to have their creation shared with all, yet Jacob does not seem entirely like that person. Unless he caters particularly to the kind, he cannot really think of any of the new neonates in the city who have really had time to appreciate his work, save the few times they've been able to pierce the inner sanctum of the Black Dog bookstore and wander the maze of tomes that lies beneath. He wants, more than anything, to trust this Primogen. He does. His sire told him long ago that clan is something stronger than family, and he wants so badly for those words to ring true, but, well, these nights, he has begun to question himself. Strange times indeed, when the few friends you are able to make, the few friends who you are able to rely on constantly are from out of clan. That is what the harpies are now to him. The printer finally stops. The last page is out. He almost doesn't notice it at first as he's caught up in his own thoughts, but he quickly gets up. He picks up the crisp paper. He flips through it. He smiles. He smiles ever so greatly. Book 1 of The Shadows of Renvale is finally completed. He indulges in a very quick victory dance there in the middle of his apartment, since he is not being watched, and he allows his inner child to be let loose for just a moment, as he cannot contain his excitement any longer. The second fantasy story that he has ever written, book 1, is now completed. He hurriedly brings the completed document over to a very poor-looking desk that he ended up picking up at a yard sale. Or at the very least, it could be best called a yard sale, when the rest of the items are put out into the street. A little joke of his. Yard sale. Gosh, he pauses there thinking about his little joke. It's funny the things that you forget about when you become a creature of the night. Brunches. Afternoon strolls. Food. Oh, the food. But his melancholy lifts for a second as the paper is practically burning in his hand. He hurries, opens a drawer, pulls out a binder, a paper ring machine, quickly stamps out holes that will serve for the rings of the binder, and quickly puts it within, taking a very cheap little label maker and marking the folder as book 1. He indulges himself with smelling the fresh paper once more, now that it's been freshly printed. It's almost intoxicating. He then sets it on his poor little makeshift desk, and then sort of sits on his little mattress. There's still so much more to do. Finding a publisher, possibly even becoming one himself. He was shown how very recently. But more important than that, who is he going to showcase his first paper to? He said that he would give Laird a copy, and he said he'd give Jebediah a copy. He does know Laird better, but this seems to be the proper icebreaker. He thinks that he will give his first printed document to Jebediah as a present, to foster connections between the Nosferatu harpy and himself. So, after coming to that, he gets up, heads back over, refills the printer, and then hits print again, and the whole process begins anew. And so he sits back down. Then he happens upon an idea. Out of all of the Primogen, with the exception, actually, do they even have a gangrel Primogen? A harpy? He thinks about that for a moment. He hasn't met anyone with that description. Surely Clan Gangrel has a harpy already. But then if so, why hasn't he come forward already? That little thought aside, he turns back to what he was originally thinking about. The Tremere harpy, James Smit. The Tremere were a very strange lot, thought Mortimer. His sire once told him many, many stories about Tremere treachery. She did not like them at all. In fact, she had a habit of referring to them as leeches, antiquated little bugs that were once highly valuable as a boon, but in modern days had been greatly eclipsed by scientific discovery, reducing them to little more than blood-drinking insects. He never understood the reason for her hatred. She did not particularly tell him of any stories. But then again, I suppose that is only proper for a sire to tell their childer. But James Smit seemed different. He was a very reasonable person. Probably more reasonable in logic than the Master of Harpies or several other of his clans. Certainly more reasonable than himself, as he smiles at that. But the relationships between the Harpies and the Tremere had strained in these recent nights. Why was it that the Tremere were so against this treaty? As he believed himself the main purpose of the treaty was to shore up the Camarillah's defenses against the impending awakening of the Methuselah. But now that that time has passed, and now that she was scheduled to return in 1 year's time, it made little sense why everyone would become so uppity when their very lives were on the line. But I suppose that was not fair of him to think. The Tremere, or at very least James Smit, seemed like a completely reasonable person. Perhaps there was more to the story than he thought. There was a lot to the clan that he did not know about. In a time like this, desperate times, if you would, since the Harpies have become more polarized as of late, he knows Laird is taking his time with Jacob, distancing himself in order to repair and keep what little kinship they have. That something must be done in order to refoster trust and camaraderie between the Harpies and the rest of the clans. If the Tremere would have none of it, then this was a detriment to all of the Camarilla, not just the Harpies. For how could they fulfill their purpose if one of the clan was not to put stock in their worth? And so, as more pages begin to print out, he thinks. And then a peculiar thing happens. The printer jams. It's understandable. It's not a very expensive printer. He didn't have the type of resources after what he had to do to help Laird Brehond in these recent nights. So he gets up, he examines the machine, and after discovering that the paper simply got stuck, he simply takes it out, puts it back in, and begins the process again. And in that little act right there, he has an idea. He takes out his cell phone, and he texts James Smit, and he asks a request on behalf of the Harpy of Clan Tremere. I think it is time, Mortimer thinks to himself, for him to meet this seneschal, the one who stands at right hand of the prince himself. For he didn't even realize there was a seneschal at all until these recent nights, until the treaty itself was about to be signed. And a pillar of the community objected to it on principle. If he was to do his job right, he would need to know those in charge, those who stand on the noble and tiered steps of the ivory tower, those whom he shall always be looking up to, until a night when they too shall fall and another will take their place. He has been warned of the danger of the Tremere more than once. But if he was to accomplish anything in this life, sometimes he would need to take drastic action. The text is sent. The printer begins to print out once more. And he goes back to sitting and thinking, what will he wear? How will he present himself? This is a man in a highly prestigious position, let alone one from a clan that he knows little about. And then the answer comes simply to him. He'll simply ask, as he texts a follow-up text to James Smit, asking if there is any particular protocol or decorum that must be observed. After all, he's a Harpy. He needs to look the part, be the part, and be the epitome of the idea if he is to have any weight in this community. For that is what the Harpies are, after all, like all titles. Just an idea, an ideal, a symbol. And he is intimately familiar with symbols. And as the night begins to wear on, the scene comes to an end.